This is my true story. I worked all my life to raise my son, giving him everything I never had. I thought, in my old age, he would stand by me. But instead, he treated me like a burden. One morning, without warning, he packed my bags, drove me to a nursing home, and said, "This is for the best. You'll thank me later." That was the day my heart broke, but it was also the day I decided to act. Before I tell you what I did next, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. And please subscribe so more people can hear my story. I was not born into comfort. My life was built on calloused hands, tired legs, and a back bent from years of hard work. I spent my youth taking every shift I could find. Morning shifts at the factory, evening shifts cleaning offices, and weekend jobs repairing broken machines. While other men rested, I worked. My only goal was simple: to give my only son a better life than mine. Every dollar I earned, every meal I skipped, every night I stayed awake worrying was for him. When he was young, I would come home late at night, covered in dust and grease. But I always carried a small toy, a piece of candy, or a warm smile for him. His little arms wrapped around me erased all the pain of my day. I thought, this boy is the reason I wake up and fight again tomorrow. When school fees came, I worked double shifts. When he wanted new books, I skipped buying new clothes for myself. When he dreamed of going to college, I poured every coin I had into making it happen. I sold tools I had kept for years, even pawned my wedding ring once, just to pay his tuition on time. And when graduation day came, I stood there in an old, faded suit, watching him walk across the stage, my chest swelling with pride. I told myself, every sacrifice was worth it. He will remember what I gave for him. Later came his wedding. I was already tired, my body worn, but I did not show it. I paid for the celebration, gave him blessings, and even surprised him with a down payment for his first house. People told me I was giving too much, but I always said, he is my son. What else should I do if not give him everything? I believed that one day, when my legs grew weak, when my eyes grew dim, he would be the one to care for me, not out of duty, but out of love. In retirement, I had little for myself. My savings mostly went into helping him settle debts, paying for his wife's needs, and supporting their children when bills piled up. I never complained. I ate simply, wore old clothes, and lived quietly, because in my heart, I believed the story of life was simple. A father sacrifices for his child, and in return, the child stands by the father in old age. That belief kept me going, even on nights when my chest ached, and I lay awake wondering if I had given too much. I never asked for luxury. I only dreamed of small things, sitting with my grandchildren, telling them stories of their grandmother who passed too soon, sharing dinners at the table where laughter echoed, being included in holidays, birthdays, and simple conversations. I dreamed of dignity, of belonging. I thought my sacrifices had earned me that. But what I did not know was that in my son's heart, those sacrifices had faded like dust in the wind. For him, my struggles were invisible. For him, my sacrifices were forgotten. For him, my worth was not measured in decades of devotion, but in how quickly I could get out of the way. I believed I had built a legacy of love, but slowly, I would learn that to him, I was just an old man taking up space. It did not happen all at once. Cruelty never comes as a storm at the beginning. It starts with small drops, so quiet you almost don't notice. At first, I told myself my son was just busy. He had a wife, children, bills, and a career. Maybe he was tired, maybe he was stressed. That is what I wanted to believe. But deep down, I began to feel a cold wind blowing between us. It started with dinners. We used to eat together at the table. I would tell stories about my childhood, about his mother, about the days when money was tight but love was strong. In the past, he would listen, sometimes even smile, but slowly, his face changed. One evening, as I spoke about the war years, I noticed him roll his eyes. His wife gave a quick smirk, and his children giggled softly. He didn't correct them. He didn't defend me. He simply said, "Dad, not tonight, okay?" The kids don't want to hear old stories. His words cut me, but I swallowed my pride and went silent. Then came the whispers. I would walk into the living room, and suddenly the conversation would stop. I would catch pieces of their voices when they thought I wasn't listening. Words like annoying, slow, old man, and he eats too much. These whispers were sharper than knives because they came not from strangers, but from the very people I gave my life to. My daughter-in-law's voice was the loudest. She said once, "He's just extra baggage. I don't know how long we can keep this up." My son didn't argue. He didn't say, "This is my father. Show respect." No, he just sighed, as if I was a burden he had no choice but to drag behind him. Even small things changed. The television, once something we enjoyed together, became off limits. I would sit down to watch the news, but within minutes, someone would take the remote, switch the channel and say, "Dad, you've had enough TV. We want to watch something else." I would retreat quietly to my room, pretending I was tired, even when I wasn't. In the kitchen, I started to notice food disappearing faster. They told me to eat less rice, less meat, to save more for the children. I agreed, though my stomach stayed empty some nights. I told myself, "It's fine. Let them eat. That is what fathers do." But no matter how much I gave, the distance grew. My son rarely spoke to me unless it was to ask me to do something. Take out the trash, sweep the porch, watch the kids while they went out. Never a, "How are you, Dad?" Never a, "Do you need anything?" His wife barely looked at me, except when she had that look in her eyes, the one that said I was unwanted in my own house. What hurt most was the grandchildren. When they were small, they ran to me. They asked me for stories, held my hand, and laughed when I showed them games from my youth. But as they grew, they learned from their parents. They began to mimic the same size, the same impatience. One day, as I struggled to open a jar with my weak hands, my grandson said, "Come on, Grandpa, you're so slow." The others laughed. I laughed with them to hide the pain, but inside, I felt my heart shrinking. The distance was not physical. I lived in the same house. I sat at the same table. I walked through the same halls. But I felt like a ghost in my own home. Invisible, unheard, unnecessary. I told myself again and again, family is family. They'll come around. Maybe they don't see it now, but one day they'll realize what I've done for them. That thought kept me going through the whispers, the rolled eyes, the stolen moments of dignity. But with each passing day, I felt it more clearly. I was not a father to them anymore. I was not a man who had worked, sacrificed, and loved. I was just an old figure in the background, a piece of furniture they had not yet thrown away. The warmth I had dreamed of in my old age, the respect I thought I had earned, all of it was slipping away piece by piece. And I, foolishly, was holding on, praying it would change. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. What came next was not silence or small insults. It was betrayal. Betrayal so deep it would burn the last of my hope and replace it with a fire I had never felt before. It happened on a morning that began like any other. I woke up early, as I always did. The house was quiet, the sun barely up. I made myself tea and sat by the window, watching the street outside. For a brief moment, I felt peace. But peace is fragile in a house where love has turned cold. That morning, it shattered. My son came into the kitchen, not with a smile or even a greeting, but with a strange look in his eyes, a mix of guilt and determination. His wife followed him, her arms crossed, her mouth set in a hard line. They did not sit down. They did not ask if I had eaten. Instead, my son said, "Dad, we need to talk." Those 4 words were heavy, and I knew before he finished that it was not good news. He told me, in a calm but distant voice, that I could no longer stay in the house. He said it like a decision already made, not a conversation. "We found a nursing home for you," he explained, as if it were a kindness. "You'll get better care there. It's what's best." His wife nodded, not out of care, but out of satisfaction, like someone finally solving a problem. I froze. My hands shook around the teacup. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. "What do you mean?" I asked. "This is my home. I built this house. I raised you here. How can you—" But before I could finish, my son cut me off. "Dad, don't make this harder than it is. We've already packed your things." Packed my things. That sentence hit me harder than any slap could. I stood up and walked to my room. And yes, it was true. Boxes stacked neatly, my clothes folded without care, my books thrown together like junk, my life reduced to cardboard and tape. I turned to my son with tears in my eyes. "This is how you treat me? After everything? After I broke my back to pay for your school, your wedding, your house? After I gave you all my years, all my strength?" My voice cracked, but his face stayed cold. "Dad, don't play the victim. We can't take care of you anymore. It's not fair to us. The home will take care of you. You'll thank me later." Thank him? For throwing me out of my own house? For tearing me from the walls where I had watched him grow? For turning me into a problem to be removed, like garbage on the curb? The betrayal cut so deep, I thought I might fall right there. They drove me that same morning. No time to argue, no time to plead. My son carried the boxes into the trunk, his wife holding the door open like they couldn't wait to see me leave. I sat silently in the back seat, staring at the back of my son's head, remembering the times that had once lay on my chest as a baby, remembering the small boy who used to call me hero. That boy was gone. In his place sat a man who saw me as nothing more than a weight. The nursing home was sterile, cold. The air smelled of disinfectant and hopelessness. They led me to a small room with a narrow bed, a single dresser, and bare walls. My son put the boxes down without looking at me. His wife checked her watch. "This is for the best," he repeated, as though saying it enough times would make it true. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg. But the betrayal had stolen my words. All I could do was sit on the bed, staring at the floor, while my son turned his back and walked out. His last words before the door closed. "You'll be fine here. We'll visit when we can." The sound of that door shutting was the sound of my heart breaking. In that moment, I realized I had been abandoned. Not by strangers, not by enemies, but by my own blood. My son had driven the knife into my chest with calm words and steady hands, and he felt no guilt. He believed he was right. He believed I was no longer a father, but a burden to be managed. That was the betrayal. Not just leaving me in that place, but leaving me with the knowledge that his love had died long ago. Betrayal is not only about actions, it is about the coldness behind them. And his coldness was absolute. As I sat in that small room, surrounded by boxes filled with the pieces of my life, I realized the truth. My son had not brought me here for my care. He had brought me here to erase me, to clear space in his home, in his life, in his conscience. He had taken the man who raised him and locked him away like a secret too heavy to carry. But what he had forgotten was this. I was not powerless. I still held something stronger than his betrayal. I held the truth of who controlled the house, the money, the estate. And though he had abandoned me, he had made a mistake far greater than he knew. The first night in that nursing home was the longest night of my life. I sat on the small bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint cries of other residents down the hall. Some were calling for nurses, others muttering names in their sleep. The walls were thin, the lights too bright, and the air carried the heavy silence of forgotten people. I realized I was now one of them. My son had placed me here and walked away, and with that one act, he told me everything I needed to know. I was no longer his father, only a burden to unload. The pain of abandonment is not just about being left behind. It is about the knowledge that you were discarded by the very person you sacrificed everything for. I thought of the years I had worked double shifts at the factory, My hands blistered, my back bent, so that my son could have food, clothes, books for school. I thought of the nights I came home exhausted, but still managed to sit by his bed, telling him stories until he fell asleep. I thought of the times I skipped meals so he could eat a little more. Every memory that had once filled me with pride now stabbed me with regret. That night, I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw my son's face, cold, detached, unmoved by my tears. I heard his voice. "This is for the best. You'll thank me later." Thank him? For throwing me away like trash? For stripping me of dignity, family, and belonging? My chest ached, not from age, but from betrayal. The second day was no better. Breakfast was served on a plastic tray, cold eggs, watery coffee, and toast so hard it felt like cardboard. I sat in the dining hall with strangers, most of them silent, some staring into nothing, others mumbling words no one listened to. I tried to eat, but my stomach was too heavy with grief. The chair felt hard, the room too bright, and the voices around me echoed in my head like reminders that I did not belong there. I wasn't ready to surrender to this place. I wasn't ready to live as if I were already gone. But the worst pain came not from the walls of the nursing home, but from the silence of my family. No phone calls, no visits, no messages. It was as though I had ceased to exist the moment they drove away. My son didn't even check if I had settled in. He didn't ask if I needed anything, if I was comfortable, if I was safe. He erased me with the turn of a key and never looked back. That silence was louder than any insult, more cruel than any slap. I spent hours staring at the small dresser in my room. On top of it sat a framed photo of my son as a child, the one I had carried with me when they packed my boxes. In the photo, he was smiling, missing 2 front teeth, holding a toy car I had bought him after saving weeks of pay. I picked up the frame, held it in my hands, and whispered, "What happened to you? Where did my boy go?" But the photo had no answers, only the mocking reminder of a love that once was. At night, the loneliness grew heavier. I lay awake, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall. Each second stretched into eternity, a reminder that I was alive, but unwanted. My heart felt hollow, my chest heavy. I thought about my wife, how she would have never allowed this. She would have stood by me, reminded our son of his duty, of the love that family is built upon. But she was gone, and without her, I had no shield. I was alone. And yet, as much as the pain cut through me, it also began to shape something else inside me. A fire. The more I thought of the betrayal, the more I realized this pain could not end with silence. My son had abandoned me, but he had also forgotten something important. I still had control. The house, the savings, the inheritance, everything he thought was his by right was still under my name. He had put me in this place to erase me, but he did not realize he had only sharpened my resolve. But before that realization took full form, I had to live through the full weight of abandonment. Days passed slowly, each one marked by routine, bland meals, quiet halls, the occasional nurse asking if I needed water. I began to recognize the faces of the other residents, men and women who, like me, had been set aside by their families. Some cried openly, some grew silent, some seemed to have accepted it. I wasn't ready to accept it. I wasn't ready to die in silence. The pain of abandonment changes a person. It strips away illusions. It shows you who truly values you and who never did. As I sat in that small room, with boxes still unpacked, I realized my son had never respected me, not truly. He had taken my sacrifices as his entitlement, my love as his right, and when I was no longer useful, he discarded me. That truth was bitter, but it was also clarifying. I stopped waiting for his call. I stopped hoping for a visit. Instead, I began to think, to plan, to use the pain as fuel. If he saw me as useless, I would show him just how powerful I still was. If he thought I had no value, I would prove to him that everything he valued was tied to me. He wanted me gone from his house, his life, but soon he would realize it was my house, my money, my decision. That was the true pain of abandonment. Not just the loneliness, but the awakening it forced upon me. I was no longer blind with love for a son who didn't deserve it. I was clear-eyed, sharper than I had been in years. And from that pain came the strength to do what I had to do next. As I sat in that small nursing home room, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights above my bed, a thought began to break through my grief, like sunlight through a crack in the curtains. My son believed he had locked me away, stripped me of power, and taken full control of my life. He believed I was finished, a weak-old man with nothing left but memories. But he had forgotten something important, something I myself had almost forgotten in the haze of humiliation and pain. The truth was this: the house he lived in, the money in the accounts, the investments, the savings, none of it belonged to him. It was all mine. Legally, every deed, every account, every cent was still tied to my name. I had worked for decades to build those assets. Every dollar in those accounts had come from sweat on my brow and blood in my veins. Every brick in the family home had been paid for, with nights I went without sleep and meals I skipped to make sure my son could eat. The land I purchased, the shares I invested in, the retirement savings I tucked away, all of it had been built slowly, painfully, carefully, by my own hands. And in my generosity, I had let my son believe it was his future. I had spoken often about leaving it to him, about how it would make his life easier when I was gone. I wanted him to feel secure, to know he would always have stability. But generosity breeds arrogance when it is met with entitlement instead of gratitude. Over time, my son stopped saying thank you. He stopped asking politely. He began to assume. The house became his house. The savings became his inheritance. The car became his car. He even bragged to his friends, telling them how he would one day inherit millions. He spoke as if I were already dead, as if my life was over and all that mattered was what I would leave behind. The truth he forgot, the truth I was now reminded of, sitting in that lonely room, was that I was not dead. I was still alive. I was still the legal owner. I still had every right, every document, every power of decision. Nothing could move without my signature. My son had placed me in a nursing home, confident that I no longer had control, but he could not have been more wrong. In fact, his betrayal had awakened me to the very control I still had. That realization was powerful. It was like standing up after being knocked down. My tears dried. My chest no longer felt as heavy. I looked at the ceiling and whispered to myself, "He forgot who I am." I remembered the day I bought the house he lived in now. I remembered signing the deed, my name written in ink, bold and proud. At the time, I thought of it as a gift for the family, a place for generations to grow. But I never transferred the title. I kept it under my name, partly for legal security, partly because a small voice inside me wanted to make sure my sacrifices would not be erased. That choice, made years ago, had now become my shield. I remembered the savings accounts. When I retired, I set aside money in joint accounts for convenience. I added my son's name so he could withdraw funds if I ever became ill. He assumed that meant the money was his, but the bank knew better. The primary holder was me. Without me, his name meant nothing. I remembered the investments, stocks, bonds, even a small piece of land outside town, all still under my control. I had never signed them away. My son never cared to ask. He simply assumed. Assumption is a dangerous thing, especially when it blinds you to the truth. As I pieced this together in my mind, the pain of abandonment began to transform into something else. Resolve. My son thought he had buried me in that nursing home, but in reality, he had only pushed me to remember the truth. And the truth was simple. I still held the keys. The forgotten truth was not just about money or property. It was about dignity. It was about power. It was about the fact that respect cannot be demanded without giving it. My son believed I was powerless, but he was wrong. I had been quiet, patient, forgiving, but I was not powerless. I began to imagine the look on his face when he discovered the truth, the shock, the anger, the fear. For years, he had built his life around the assumption that my estate was his safety net. He had spent money carelessly, confident that more would come when I was gone. He had borrowed on the promise of inheritance. He had strutted around like a man who already owned the world. But the truth would hit him like a storm. He owned nothing. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this was not just about revenge. It was about justice. It was about setting the record straight. He had treated me like garbage, like a burden to be cast aside. But I was the very reason he stood where he stood. Without me, he would have had no education, no car, no house, no job, no life of comfort. I gave him everything, and in return, he gave me betrayal. The forgotten truth gave me strength. That night, I no longer felt like a prisoner in the nursing home. I no longer felt like an abandoned old man. I felt like a man with power, a man with decisions to make. My son thought he had won. But I knew differently. He had already lost, because he had forgotten the one thing that mattered most. I still held the pen that could change everything. And so, I decided. I would not let his betrayal stand. I would not die quietly, leaving him the fruits of my labor. He would learn that respect is not optional. He would learn that betrayal has consequences. And I would teach him that lesson, not with anger, not with shouting, not with fists, but with paper, with signatures, with the silent force of the law. The forgotten truth was my weapon, and I was ready to use it. The morning after I remembered the truth, I woke up with a new kind of energy. My body was still weak, my bones still ached, and the walls of the nursing home still felt like a cage. But my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing the shuffle of nurses and the faint sound of a TV down the hall. I knew then it was time to act. No more waiting. No more hoping my son would change. No more forgiving someone who saw me as nothing but a burden. I turned my head and looked at the phone on the little table beside my bed. That phone was my lifeline now. Not to call family, not to beg for visits, but to reach the one person who could help me turn thought into action. My lawyer. I had known him for many years, a man who had handled my papers, wills, and deeds since I was in my 50s. He was reliable, careful, and above all, discreet. If anyone could help me protect what was mine, it was him. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling slightly from age, but steady with determination. I dialed his number from memory. When he answered, his voice was calm and professional, but when he recognized me, it softened. "Mr. Anderson, it's been a while. How are you?" I took a deep breath. "Not good," I said. "My son put me in a nursing home. He thinks I'm finished, but I need your help. I need to make changes, serious ones." There was silence for a moment, then his voice came back, firm. "Tell me exactly what you want, and we'll make it happen." That was the moment the call to action truly began. For months, maybe years, I had accepted humiliation. I had let small insults pass. I had let myself believe that family blood was stronger than pride, stronger than dignity. But now I understood. Family without respect is nothing. My son had crossed a line, and I had allowed it because I thought I had no power. But the truth was, I had always had power. I just never used it. Until now. I told my lawyer everything. I told him I wanted my son removed from my will. I told him I wanted the deeds, the house, the accounts secured so that he would never touch them again. I wanted everything shifted away from him, to people and causes that would respect what I had built. I wanted the paperwork done fast, tight, and impossible to undo. He listened carefully, asking questions here and there, making notes. "Are you sure about this?" he asked finally. "Once we do this, it cannot be reversed without your signature. Your son will be left with nothing." "Good," I said simply. That is exactly what I want. He left me with nothing but shame. He made me feel like a piece of trash. He abandoned me here. So I will leave him the same. Nothing. The lawyer's tone grew sharper, more serious. Then we will move quickly. I'll come to you. Give me a day to prepare the documents. I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. For the first time since my son drove me to that nursing home and left me behind, I felt in control. My hands shook, but not from weakness. They shook from excitement, from resolve, from the fire of taking back what was mine. That entire day, I thought of nothing else. While the nurses walked past, while other residents chatted in the common room, while meals were delivered, I sat quietly, planning. I replayed every insult my son had thrown at me. Every time he rolled his eyes, every time he told me to shut up, every time he acted like my house, my money, my sacrifices were already his. Those memories didn't crush me anymore. They fueled me. They were the reasons I was doing what I was doing. I remembered the look on his face the day he dumped me here. He thought he was being clever, smart, taking care of me in his own twisted way. He thought he had control now, that the old man was finished. I smiled to myself as I imagined the look on his face when he opened that envelope from my lawyer. When he realized everything he thought was his future had vanished overnight. That smile stayed with me all day. The next morning, my lawyer arrived. He carried a leather briefcase and walked with the confidence of a man who knew the law was on his side. The staff at the nursing home gave me odd looks as he signed in, but I didn't care. We sat in the small visitor's room. He spread out the papers on the table. "This is your will," he explained. "We'll remove your son as heir. Instead, we'll redirect your estate into trusts, charities, or relatives you choose. This here is the deed to the family home. Still in your name, we'll secure it in the trust as well. And here are your financial accounts. With a signature, we can lock him out completely." I took the pen slowly. My hand was weak, but steady enough to sign. Each signature felt like lifting a weight from my chest. Each line I drew across the paper felt like reclaiming a piece of my dignity. My lawyer watched carefully, nodding with approval. When the last paper was signed, he gathered them, slid them back into his briefcase, and looked at me. "It's done," he said. "He has no claim anymore. You're protected." I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment. A wave of relief washed over me, heavier than any words could describe. For so long, I had felt powerless. Now, with a few signatures, I had turned the tables. That was my call to action, not shouting, not fighting, not begging, just quiet, deliberate action, legal, final, unstoppable. When my lawyer left, I stayed in that visitor's room for a while, staring out the window. The sun was setting, casting orange light across the parking lot. I thought of my son coming to visit, expecting me to smile at him, expecting me to still be the weak old man he thought I was. He would never see it coming. His arrogance had blinded him, and my silence would be the sharpest weapon I ever used. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered to myself, "It begins now." A few days later, the work of my lawyer turned into the weapon I had been waiting for. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to curse. I didn't even need to see my son's face when it all hit him. All I needed was an envelope, thick, official, and carrying the weight of the law. That envelope carried my revenge, my dignity, and my final answer to every insult he had thrown at me. It was the legal notice. I remember sitting in my small nursing home room when my lawyer called me. His voice was calm, steady, the voice of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "It has been mailed," he said. "By now your son has it in his hands, or it will arrive today." I closed my eyes, imagining the scene. My son, so confident, so sure that I was powerless, walking to the mailbox. Maybe his wife would be there with him, laughing about their day, certain that the old man sitting in the nursing home was too weak to fight back. Then he'd see the envelope, the government stamp, the lawyer's name on the return address. His hand would pause. He'd feel a flicker of worry, though he wouldn't admit it yet. Inside that envelope was the truth he never expected. The notice stated in clear, cold words that he was no longer my heir, that the estate, the house, the savings, the investments, everything he had always assumed was already his, was beyond his reach. The paperwork was sealed, irreversible. He had been erased from my will, not by accident, not by oversight, by my choice. The legal notice made it official, binding, and permanent. I imagined his face as he read the words. At first, confusion. He'd frown, reread the lines, thinking he misunderstood. Then anger would rise. He would slam the paper down on the table, pacing, cursing, shouting at his wife. She would try to calm him, but deep down she'd know the truth too. They had built their life on an inheritance that was never promised. They had mocked me, humiliated me, discarded me, and assumed I was too weak to fight back. Now the law itself was telling them otherwise. The best part was the precision of it. The notice didn't come from me directly. It wasn't my handwriting. It wasn't an angry letter filled with emotions. No, it was colder than that. It came from the system, from the authority they thought was always on their side. Signed, stamped, and delivered by forces greater than their arrogance. It didn't need my voice to scream. The silence of the words on the page screamed louder than anything I could have said. My lawyer had written it carefully. By decision of the primary estate holder, son's name is hereby removed as beneficiary. All claims to assets, property, and accounts are void. Legal ownership has been transferred into designated trusts and to beneficiaries as listed. This change is final and binding. That was the heart of it. But attached was more. Documents proving the new ownership, sealed filings showing the changes were already recorded. There was no loophole, no trick, no chance to argue. It was done. I sat by my window in the nursing home, watching the trees sway outside, and thought of the decades that had led to this. All the nights I worked double shifts so he could go to college. All the meals I skipped so he could eat. All the savings I used to pay his wedding, his house, his comforts. Every sacrifice I made, thinking it was for love, thinking one day I'd sit at his table with respect. And in return, he had locked me away, thrown me into this place like I was trash. Now he would finally understand the weight of his choices. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because of pain, but because I kept picturing him holding that paper. I imagined him trying to call me, his voice filled with rage and panic. I imagined his wife urging him to fix it as though he could undo what had been signed. But I knew the truth. He couldn't. The law was on my side, and the law doesn't care about tears or excuses or regret. By the next morning, the phone in my room began to ring. I didn't answer. I knew it was him. Call after call came through. The nurses looked at me strangely as I sat calmly, letting the phone ring. They didn't know what was happening. They didn't know that each unanswered ring was another knife twisting in his pride. Each silence was louder than words. Eventually, the ringing stopped. I knew then that he had read every page, that he had realized the full meaning of that envelope. He was not just cut off, he was erased. His future, the one he thought was built on my back, was gone. The beauty of the legal notice was not just the power it carried. It was the simplicity. A piece of paper, some signatures, a stamp, an envelope. That was all it took to destroy the arrogance of a man who thought he controlled me. I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to fight. I didn't even have to leave this room. All I had to do was sign and let the law do the rest. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the ceiling, and whispered to myself, "Now you know what it feels like to be discarded." He had discarded me like I was nothing. Now I had discarded him in the only way that truly mattered, by taking away the future he thought belonged to him. And the best part? I hadn't even spoken my final words yet. Those would come later, in a letter. But the legal notice was the first blow, the one that broke his arrogance. It was the sound of silence turned into steel. After the legal notice reached him, after the shouting, after the unanswered calls, I knew the time had come to give my son something he could never escape from. My last words as his father. Not words of love, not words of forgiveness, but words of truth. The kind of truth that cuts deeper than any insult. The kind of truth that stays in your head forever, even when the world is silent. I didn't want to scream at him. Screaming would have made me look weak, like I was begging him to understand me. I didn't want to meet him in person either, because I had no more tears left to shed in front of him. So, I chose the coldest way possible. I chose a letter. One sheet of paper, written in my shaky hand, folded neatly, slipped into an envelope. It was not long. It didn't need to be. Just a few sentences, sharp and final, like the sound of a door slamming shut. I wrote, "You sent me away like a burden. You put me in a nursing home to erase me from your life. I send you away now, not from my house, but from my legacy. You will inherit nothing from me. This is goodbye, not just from my will, but from my heart. Do not look for me. Do not call me. Do not write. My silence will be the only answer you get." I didn't even sign it. No "love, Dad." No signature. Just the words, typed in his mind like a scar that would never fade. I put it in the envelope, sealed it, and gave it to my lawyer. "Deliver this only after he calls again," I said. And of course, he called, over and over, desperate. My lawyer chose the right time and sent the letter. I can imagine the scene in his house. He tears open the envelope, maybe hoping it was forgiveness, maybe hoping it was a second chance. But instead, he gets those lines. He reads them once, twice, a third time. His hands shake, his chest tightens, his pride collapses. Maybe his wife looks over his shoulder, and for the first time, she sees the cracks in him. She sees the arrogance melt into fear. He thought he had won when he locked me away. He thought the battle was finished. But the war had just started, and I had already won. The final goodbye wasn't just about cutting him off from money. It was about cutting him off from me. From the man who had raised him, fed him, sacrificed for him, given him everything he had. He thought inheritance was about property, houses, money, cars. He didn't understand that the real inheritance of a father is respect, dignity, and love. Those are the treasures I carried all my life, and now he would have none of them. When I put that letter in motion, I felt something shift inside me. For months, I had lived with humiliation, being discarded like trash, treated as if I had no voice, no rights, no worth. Now, with a few words, I had reclaimed my dignity. My final goodbye was not weak. It was strong, sharper than any insult he had ever thrown at me. He had thought of me as useless, but now he knew I was powerful enough to erase him from everything he cared about. After the letter was sent, I turned my phone off for good. The silence became my weapon. Each day that passed without a reply, without a call answered, was another reminder to him that I was serious. He could beg, he could scream, he could cry, but my silence would drown him louder than his noise ever drowned me. Silence became my revenge. Some people think a goodbye should be soft, a chance for healing. But this goodbye was a wall that separated me from him forever. A wall built from his cruelty, sealed by my resolve. And once that wall was built, there was no door, no window, no way back. I knew what would happen after he read it. He'd pace the room, punch the table, maybe even shout at his wife. He'd say I was unfair, that I was cruel. But those words would only echo back at him, because deep down, he knew the truth. He wasn't discarded by accident. He was discarded because he earned it. Every insult, every eye roll, every whisper at the dinner table, every act of betrayal. It all added up to this one ending. And the final touch? I never gave him the satisfaction of seeing me again. He would never look into my eyes and plead. He would never get to put on an act of fake remorse. He would never get another chance to twist my heart. The last image he had of me was me walking into that nursing home, small and silent. But in his mind, that memory would never match the truth. Because now, he would always know. That small, silent man had the last word. My goodbye wasn't just a letter. It was freedom. Freedom from him, from his arrogance, from his cruelty. Freedom from the weight of waiting for respect that would never come. I closed that chapter with 4 short lines, and I never looked back. After the letter was delivered, the silence became a storm in my son's life. He had lived his whole life believing I was a safety net, a backup plan, a man who would always forgive no matter the insult. But the moment he opened that envelope, his illusion shattered. The words hit him harder than any slap could have. He thought he had gotten rid of me by sending me to that nursing home, but now he realized I had gotten rid of him, from everything that truly mattered. The phone calls came first. My old phone buzzed for hours, day after day. First angry calls, then desperate ones. His voice turned from rage to begging. He left messages saying it was a misunderstanding, that he didn't mean it, that the nursing home was for my health. Lies stacked on lies, but I never listened past the first few seconds. Each message sounded smaller than the last, his pride shrinking under the weight of losing what he thought was already his. Then came the visits. I heard from neighbors that he showed up at my old house, banging on the doors, asking for me, shouting my name into empty rooms. But he found nothing. Just silence, empty walls, and locked doors. His arrogance was cracking. The man who once smirked as he dumped me into a sterile nursing home now stood outside a locked house that no longer belonged to him. And the truth must have burned in his chest. He had thrown me out of his life, and now I had thrown him out of mine. But the real pain wasn't in losing my presence. It was in losing my legacy. His entire life, he assumed the estate, the money, the house, all of it, would flow straight into his hands. He boasted about it to friends, planned futures with it, built his pride on something he had never earned. But when he contacted my lawyer, demanding answers, he got the truth delivered like a hammer. He was out, erased. Not a cent, not a brick, not a scrap of my legacy belonged to him anymore. The inheritance he thought was guaranteed was gone forever. His anger exploded. He screamed at the lawyer, threatened lawsuits, shouted that it wasn't fair. But the law didn't care about his tantrums. Every document was sealed, every signature legal, every paper airtight. He was powerless. For the first time in his life, he had no control over me, no control over my choices, no control over the future he thought was his. All his life, he had treated me like I was weak, like I was disposable. But now, the weak old man had beaten him without lifting a hand. The humiliation spread further than he ever expected. Word reached his friends, his in-laws, even his children. The story of what he had done, sending his own father to a nursing home just to get rid of him, slipped through whispers and gossip. Neighbors stopped smiling at him. Friends stopped inviting him. His own children asked questions he couldn't answer. And behind every whisper, every cold glance, every awkward silence, he saw my shadow. He had built his life on disrespect, and now that disrespect had turned into his downfall. I imagine the nights were the worst for him. Lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the letter over and over in his head. My words, sharp, final, unbending, echoing in the silence he couldn't escape. He had laughed at me once, mocked me for being slow, weak, old. Now he sat alone, weaker than ever, stripped of the one thing he thought he controlled, the future. But for me, the aftermath was peace. Each day that passed without answering his calls was another reminder that I was free. Free from his cruelty, free from his arrogance, free from the pain of waiting for respect that would never come. My silence was louder than his shouting, and he could do nothing to break it. The best part? I didn't need to watch his collapse. I didn't need to stand in front of him and see his tears. I didn't need to explain myself. My revenge didn't need witnesses. It was quiet, clean, complete. He knew, and that was enough. When the dust settled, the world was different. He had no inheritance, no father, no safety net. Just the cold truth that his own actions had cost him everything. And me? I had dignity again. I had peace. I had the satisfaction of knowing that the man who locked me away in a nursing home was now locked out of my life forever. That was the true aftermath. Not chaos, not noise, but silence. A silence that spoke louder than words. A silence that crushed his pride. A silence that set me free. When the storm passed, I was still standing. My son had lost his inheritance, his pride, and his false sense of control, but I had gained something far more valuable: peace. After years of carrying the weight of sacrifice, after years of enduring small humiliations, and finally the deep betrayal of being dumped into a nursing home, I found myself free, truly free. I chose not to stay in that nursing home any longer. I signed myself out, packed what little I owned into a small suitcase, and walked out the doors with my head higher than it had been in years. The staff tried to persuade me to stay, but I knew my place was not in a facility where I had been left like a package no one wanted. My place was in the world, on my own terms, living with the dignity I had rebuilt through my own decisions. I used my money, the savings and estate my son thought he controlled, to secure a quiet life in a senior community far from the city. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was mine. For the first time in years, every corner of the place felt like home. There were no whispers, no rolled eyes, no sharp words meant to cut me down. Instead, there was respect. People greeted me with kindness, neighbors invited me to join their activities, and even the silence of my room was comforting. It was not the silence of abandonment, it was the silence of dignity. Each day, I woke up when I wanted, not when someone else told me to. I made my own breakfast, even if it was simple toast and tea, and every bite tasted like freedom. I could walk in the garden, sit on the porch, read books, and share stories with people who actually wanted to listen. And the best part was knowing that everything around me was mine by choice, not charity. Sometimes in the evenings, I thought about my son, not with hate, but with a heavy sort of sadness. I remembered the boy he once was, the boy who ran into my arms after school, the boy I worked double shifts for, the boy I dreamed would one day care for me with love. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who saw me as a burden. And though it hurt, I accepted the truth. Love without respect is not love at all. He called me for weeks after the legal notice arrived. His voice went from angry to pleading to broken. But I never answered, because answering would have meant reopening a wound I had finally closed. My silence was not cruelty. It was my final boundary. He had told me, through his actions, that I was no longer his father in his eyes. And I, through my silence, told him that he was no longer my heir, no longer my responsibility, no longer the center of my world. In that silence, I found strength. And in that strength, I built a new life. I started volunteering at the local library, reading stories to children on weekends. They listened with wide eyes and warm hearts, never once mocking my age or my slow hands. Some of them reminded me of my son when he was young, before arrogance and pride poisoned him. Being around them healed a part of me I thought was lost forever. I realized that family is not always blood. Sometimes, family is found in the people who show you respect, who see your worth, who welcome you without conditions. I also made friends in the community, people my age who had faced their own betrayals, their own heartbreaks, their own lonely nights. We shared meals, laughed at old memories, and found comfort in knowing we were not alone. Every story reminded me that pain can either destroy you or reshape you, and I chose the second. The money I once thought would go to my son now goes toward my comfort and to causes I believe in. I funded scholarships for children from poor families because I know what it means to grow up with nothing. I donated to hospitals because I know what it feels like to depend on others in times of weakness. And I supported local shelters because I know the pain of being made to feel unwanted. My legacy, the one my son thought was his, became something larger, something better, something that would outlive both of us. As for my son, I know his life has changed. The house he thought would be his is no longer in his name. The inheritance he counted on is gone. His friends look at him differently, his children ask questions he cannot answer, and his pride lies broken at his feet. But that is his path, not mine. I do not rejoice in his suffering, but I do not regret the justice that life delivered. Because in the end, justice was not about revenge. Justice was about respect. I had given everything, my work, my sweat, my years, to ensure he had a good life. And in return, he tried to erase me. But I refused to let him write the final chapter of my story. That was my right, and I claimed it. Now, as I sit by the window in my quiet room, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I feel peace. A peace I never thought I'd feel again. Not because I won, not because I punished him, but because I finally chose myself. After a lifetime of giving, I kept something for me, my dignity. And if anyone asks me what lesson I learned, I say this: respect is not given because of blood. Respect is earned. My son lost it. And with that loss, he lost everything else. My final thought: he put me in a home to erase me. I erased him instead, from my will, my house, and my heart. And in doing so, I found my peace.